Sounds True presents Invisible Acts of Power, Session 4, Generosity through the 6th and 7th Chakras, with Caroline Myss.
The maxim of the 6th chakra is you create your own reality, which is a teaching I'm sure most people are very familiar with by now. So let's apply that to what does that mean within the context of generosity, within the context of 6th chakra perception and intuition. To take that a step further, what do you tell yourself about life in terms of optimism, pessimism, in terms of how you can solve your problems, your challenges, in terms of opportunities, or how your life is? How do you structure your perceptions about the environment that is your life? Generosity to yourself includes the choice of your attitudes. Do you have generous attitudes about the nature of your own life? This is actually, so to me, it's an exhilarating notion that you can be attitudinally very selfish with yourself. That part of generosity should include, the definition of generosity should include the manner in which you feed your mind, your attitudes, your psyche, your 6th chakra. Do you see yourself, for example, as someone who has absolutely no luck? As someone for whom, if something happened, absolutely no one is there for you, period? Is that an attitude you have? Do you have something like, the worst thing always happens to me anyway? It's not going to work out. Is that a functioning attitude in you? Because that perception is one that a lot of people have, and those are the people for whom miracles may or may never happen, because they're not attitudinally fertile. How will a miracle get in? You see what I mean? If you're already living in a world where that whole perception that anything can happen, any way can happen, something wonderful can happen, or something helpful or some divine intervention can come if you need it, when you need it. If you don't believe that, does that mean God cares whether or not you believe it? No, but I'll tell you what it does mean. It means that you'll look at something and you won't see the opportunity in there, just a threat or just an empty space. One of the characteristics of this contemporary spiritual culture of ours is that there is an awakening of intuitive abilities that is genuine. And I have spoken to, I don't know how many people through the years, it's countless, about how they experience their own emergence into this field. When your psyche starts to wake up, when your intuitive perceptions begin to wake up, they can oftentimes feel like a loose cannon on deck. In other words, one day you're like a baby cobra who can't regulate its psychic venom. So one day it all shoots out, another day there's nothing, until you learn, and I don't like the word learn, but until life matures you. That is the way to think. Until life takes you through maturation processes, which include intuitive perceptual ones. The 6th chakra is your center of intuitive wisdom. That is to say, if you get an intuitive hit, are you supposed to share it? Does that mean just because you are intuitively downloaded with a perception that it's the wise thing to say something to someone? Or is the greater act of generosity is to mind your own intuitive business? You see, when I mentioned earlier that intuition has become a hybrid spirituality, one of the illusions people are under is that that every intuitive hit somehow is a channeled essence from God that needs delivery. All right, now let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about in terms of the wise and definitely unwise reception of intuition and how it's distributed in terms of wanting to be of service to others. Because I tell you, you can't evolve intuitively, selectively. In other words, you can't decide, I want to be an intuitive and only perceive good news. And you can't decide, I want to be an intuitive and I only want to work 9 to 5. Okay? But you also can't tell yourself that every intuitive impression should be delivered and is a download from God that the other person needs to know about. Part of the maturation is to recognize when a perception is just for you, or whether or not there is a verb that just came with that noun, or just a noun. I mean, after all, if you were a painter, does that mean you're supposed to paint every room you see? That's ridiculous. Okay, but you can walk in a room and you can say, this needs a coat of paint, but I'm not going to tell them that. I have a feeling that this room, the attitude in this room would shift entirely if they would just paint it marigold. But if you don't have the inner movement that says, tell them that, keep your mouth shut. Because so here, get this one. This absolutely, this is a story, of course, but in this particular case, I was there. And so I'm with someone who has his particular high voltage fear is health, illness, and an early death, because that is a history in his family. Now, I heighten this because as intuitives, you can pick up someone's exaggerated fear because they're exaggerating the frequency. Just as I said to you earlier, the heart can shoot out bullets when it's an unforgiving instrument. What happens with people in their psyche is that when you have heightened attitudes, remember the sixth chakra is judgments, it's attitudes about people, attitudes that can be very intense. What's ever exaggerated, another person can pick up who's intuitive. And let me take this a step further. When you exaggerate an attitude, and usually exaggerated ones are your shadows, that's the impression they'll have of you. They'll pick it up. And they'll think, this person is so, I don't know what it is about them. Someone else who doesn't have that level, that quality of antenna, may not pick up your that same intuitive vibration off someone. But you do. And what if you were to decide to say, I'm going to talk about that person, I'm going to judge that person? You see, that's a misuse of your own perceptions in such a way that you do more harm than good. Now then, so I'm with this person, and his fear of an early illness truly is exaggerated, and it has completely organized his life, his energy, his lifestyle, which is impeccably healthy. He's devoted to making his family a health center. But he's also incredibly vulnerable if any of his physical data is off, or any kind of information comes to him that kind of makes him feel there isn't some way he can combat it. Okay? In other words, he goes for an annual physical and the doctor says you have high cholesterol. All right, he can deal with that because there's something he can do. But in this case, this is what happened. We're sitting in a place, and there was a person in there who has a reputation of being a well-known psychic. Okay. And this person was just saying things like, this person's going to get sick, and this, really, it was terrible that this person's going to have a bad time, and this person's going to do this, that marriage isn't going to work. And really, I'm not exaggerating. It was like a litany, and nothing in the litany about anybody was kind, benevolent. You see, all right, so just remember, where does that come from in terms of a person's own attitudes pulls in their hits? But having said that, my friend didn't even want to make eye contact with her. But as it turned out, as he looked up, there it was, and she said, and as for you, and he said, oh, I don't want to know any of that stuff. I don't want to know about getting sick. I don't want to know about when I'm going to die. To which she said, don't worry about it. You're going to die at this age. And she gave him his age. And I looked, and I tell you seriously, knowing this person as well as I do, I could feel the impact of it. And I knew when I sort of immediately pulled him aside and I said, oh, just Nick, with that kind of stuff, just dismiss that. But you can't, because that is a curse. That is a curse. And no matter what I did, what I said, I knew I could feel it in my own gut. It had shot in, and it found its target, and it locked in. And I said, what does that person know? And look at the shape she's in, and get out of here. Does that look like someone who's got... It was too late. Now I have to tell you that sort of passing on of intuitive hits are among the cruelest things I have ever seen in my life, without a doubt. At the same time, there's the opposite side, which is the many times people have received pieces of wisdom that they recognized or accepted as absolutely phenomenally rich spiritual gifts. I love this story. And I love, some of the stories I pick out specifically because they're so simple, because they're so uncomplicated, because they're so sweet, and therein lies their power. So this woman said that when she was a little girl, she was at a park Girl Scout kind of thing, and there was a ice cream kiosk. And all the little girls were waiting in line. It was a long day. It was hot. And she was, as it turned out, she was at the end of the line, and she had to wait all this time to get there. And when she got there, this woman said to her, thank you for being so polite and waiting because you had to wait in the hot sun. That sentence changed her life. And here's the reason. She said she thought about it, and it made her feel for the first time that she could choose what was wise and unwise behavior. Somehow passing on, somehow it activated in her that she could have chosen to be impatient, but she didn't. And that nobody was there telling her, you be nice, that she decided that herself. And that somehow it opened up in her a level of all it takes is one wonderful thought, and you can inspire people. That's all. What she woke up to was the power of one drop of kindness or wisdom. You see, it's a sixth chakra perception because it woke up a truth in her mind that then determined the choices she would later make in life when dealing with anybody. She said from that day on, she always watched her words as often as she could when she was talking to someone in a more intimate setting, because she realized you're listening to me carefully, whereas most people don't. When in normal life, most people are not going to fixate, look at you, and attune to you with the same sharpness that someone who's vulnerable to you will. And that's where your whole sense of generosity must determine the vocabulary you choose with which to say what you need to say to somebody. That is generosity of the vocabulary, wisdom, communication sense. Do you have to add on a negative comment when you say something to someone? At the same time, a different version of generosity is how you receive feedback from people who tell you things you need to hear. Some of the people wrote about acts of service in which they said that they consider some of the greatest acts of service that they've ever received in life came from people who had to deliver some really intense feedback about them. That they knew they had to listen to it. I mean, how did this one story go? This woman said she went to a week-long seminar. The seminar was on empowerment of some sort. It wasn't mine. And God knows I wouldn't teach a week-long seminar. But anyway, she went to this week-long seminar. And at the end, it was a circle of feedback. Now, you know for a fact those things can be lethal. You know it. You absolutely know it. Because providing feedback is an art. Okay? And this is where the generosity of the psyche is something you really have to be mindful of, because it is such an art. And you are either going to impart wisdom or you are about to download someone with a wound. Now, at this point, as I'm speaking to you, I want you to imagine that you're sitting across from somebody and your 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st chakras are lit up like a Christmas tree. And they are scoping the other person sitting opposite you. And what you're doing is a reading. You're reading this person. Because you create your own reality, and you can access energetic data. That's what an intuitive reading is. And by this time in your life, you do that. You may not be able to interpret that information as accurately as you might think, but believe me, you're doing that. So now you're opposite that person and you're doing a reading. And you can sense their vulnerabilities. How and what are you supposed to do with that information when you're in a setting that is designed to encourage the best of your perceptions to come out into the public? Okay? Now let's think that through. What really do you need to say? Well, because I've been around enough of these groups where I've seen people pull out daggers verbally when it came to each other because of projections, because of whatever kind of nonsense. I've seen adults turn into children like in a playground. And they can't see it. They can't see it. Well, in this particular case, this woman said that when it came time for her to receive feedback, this one person said, "You are the curmudgeon of the group. You're always complaining. Nothing can make you happy. No matter what we said, you had a negative response." And she said she absolutely was frozen when he said that. And she looked to the rest of the group, hoping somebody would come to her rescue and say, "Oh, now, she really is a nice person," and that the energy and the anger would be directed toward this person who said that to her. But in fact, what happened was that everybody agreed with him. And in various ways said, "Well, we did find you a little bit pessimistic. We did find you this way." And she said that she knew in that moment that she was being offered a life-changing experience. Okay, pause. Where did that knowing come from? Okay, this is grace. We're touching the lid of the 7th chakra, okay? We're touching the lid of your grace bank account. So just think that you're in a circumstance, and the circumstance becomes overwhelming, out of control. You're suddenly in a cyclone. You didn't see it coming. You're vulnerable. You're in a cyclone. go to the sixth chakra, you are automatically going to, of course you are, try to collect data. Where am I? What's going on? How am I going to handle this? How should I respond? What am I supposed to say? They're looking at me. Are they not? What's the consequence of my action here? You go into this because you need to calculate, you need to strategize that data. Among the many questions that will automatically kick in when you are in a threatening situation, and they will kick in automatically. You don't have to say, now what are those questions? They just kick in. Somewhere in the midst of that will be a pause that says, is this an opportunity for empowerment here? What am I supposed to do in terms of, is this a life-changing event? What am I supposed to do here in terms of empowerment? You will get that. And if you think back on other moments in your life that were particularly chaotic or traumatic, if you can really put yourself on micro memory, you'll pick up that question. You'll hear it. You'll know that somewhere that question was asked of you. That's why I selected her letter, because she identified that moment. And she said, I knew that it was a moment for me, that I could either choose to embrace this feedback, or I could respond with broken pride and arrogance. And she said, I paused for a moment, and I chose, now watch, chose fifth chakra. Now we're going down here, so look alive. I chose fifth chakra to 4, go to the heart, to receive this information with an open heart instead of pride. Go down to the third chakra, ego. I decided that they didn't mean to hurt me, that they really had my best interests at heart, fourth chakra. So think of that phrase, the best interests at heart. It's above the waist, okay? Or the eye of the hourglass. So she said, I gave it a thought. I listened to everything they have to say. I thought about it, and I realized I was a pessimist. I was negative. I did have, my fundamental attitudes were, if you said, why don't you try this? I would say, it won't work. If you said, did you ever think about doing this? I would say, yeah, but it wasn't good enough. I would always find a way to negate every suggestion a person gave me. She said, I was never open to the possibility that a miracle could come into my life, and I resented that. She said, so I saw the world as an essentially dysfunctional place, and nothing could change that, and I was essentially dysfunctional. There is a wonderful quote, that you see the world not as it is, but as you are. And I think that the wisdom of that flooded into her that day. And then she said that from that day on, she was a different person, and as was the quality of her life. And you know, I tell you something, one of the things about these sixth chakra letters that was so magnificent was that they're the ones that were like perfume for me, how the tiniest thing went the greatest distance. See, by this time, you're into a level of generosity. They're like droplets of perfume, where a person senses what another person needs to hear or feel, or where you find yourself saying things that are completely out of character for you, but you just happen to know what to say in the moment. And so often, those moments, they're always unrehearsed. They're always unrehearsed. And the gods are particularly kind, and here's another type of miracle. When you see nothing unusual in your own wisdom. When you yourself don't declare the best part of you as your own wisdom, but rather when your most extraordinary part is to you your most ordinary, that is a miracle. That is a miracle of grace, because I'll tell you something. When your light doesn't blind you, that's when it's a channel that can be most generously used toward the benefit of others. Another characteristic of sixth chakra stories that people wrote were the ingredients that made for a synchronistic event, or those things that happen that are products of this law. God helps him who helps himself, and God helps her who helps herself, just for editorial correctness. There were so many people who described experiences in which they were in very difficult times, various types, and they knew that the guidance that was given to them was not a quick fix, but that it would require quite a journey on their part. They knew that. And yet many people who wrote said, I knew instantly that I was being told exactly what I should do. And I also knew that it was up to me to muster up the courage to actually do that. And how often these people, in fact, followed through, and then they wrote about the consequence of having the courage to do that. There is one story I do want to read from that, because I don't want to miss any of the details, nor do I want to miss the sequence of events. And I want to point out that I chose this letter because it carries the significance of maintaining positive attitudes, or healthy attitudes, benevolent attitudes, regardless of what quality the day of your life is. Okay, that no matter how incredibly difficult a circumstance is, the one tool you have with you at all times is your ability to animate, to breathe life into a positive attitude. That is a sixth chakra grace fact of life. When all else fails, you can pull out a positive attitude. And even in the moment, if you have absolutely no regard and no faith in it, just pull it out, write it down on a piece of paper, and put it someplace where you see it, until you've got enough stamina to animate it. And I'll tell you what I believe. I can't prove this, but of course I'm right. And that's that putting it out is enough to keep its capacity to generate synchronicity or miraculous energy hovering in your energy field. Okay? It's enough. It's enough to say, I feel so abandoned, but I am never alone. The abandoned part is what's causing you to feel like you are at the end of the line for yourself. And yet the truth is you are not alone. In that moment, you are incapable of animating that thought. But your deeper self knows you believe that. And that, put it out in front so you see it. Write it on your refrigerator. That is enough of an act to keep the grace of that thought hovering, and therefore activating laws of cause and effect in magnetic attraction. That's enough to do that. That's why I love this story. So, her name is Valerie, and she writes, several years ago, I went through a desperate time. I had to move out of the house that I had intended to buy, and this meant moving my young son hundreds of miles away. I was devastated. In addition, my ex-husband quit his job and stopped paying child support, and then my car stopped running for good. After figuring expenses, I needed $300 more a month to survive and had no idea where this money was going to come from or even how I was going to go to work. Now I'm going to pause just a minute to tell you something while it's on my mind. I found something so oddly intriguing, and I still don't know what to make of it. But more people had extraordinary experiences as a result of their cars breaking down than I can possibly tell you. I cannot tell you. I mean, I now think that a broken car is a miracle. No, to me, it's now a sign of a miracle. Look, I didn't make up these letters. I am reporting. You have no idea how. I actually thought of calculating the number. Like, is it 200? And I got, now it's about 1,600 letters because they keep coming in. But you have no idea how many people's lives were transformed because their cars broke down and who stopped by the wayside, that it happened to break down in front of this place, that they happened to break down, and lo and behold, where are they? In front of an auto repair stop. And here's this man, and will you help me out? He's single, and hello. Okay? No, you think I'm kidding? I'm telling you a letter, okay? Or that the many, many times, and I've already shared some of those, where people have been hitchhiking and they were picked up, and the incredible imparting of wisdom by these strangers who picked them up. So I don't know what it is about cars, but I will tell you right now, and here's a fact. It's not an accident. If a car breaks down, if you can remember this, it's a horrible frustration, especially when you're on a single lane highway and everybody but Santa Claus is behind you. And that's really awful, and you start shaking and you want to cry and you just want to go evaporate. But I tell you, wouldn't it be funny to get out of your car and say, I'm not moving till my miracle shows up. I'm sorry, that's what this is about. I'm expecting a miracle. I'm not the one who did it. Get out of here. Wouldn't that be funny? I think that's funny. Okay. Anyway. All right. So here she goes. Now, here's a point, one of the reasons I chose this letter. And that in spite of what most people would consider a really desperate situation, abandonment, survival trauma, no money, she writes, I should mention here that I've been very lucky in my life to know the truth and the power of prayer. I never doubt that my prayers are heard and answered. I consider this inner knowing a gift from God and have had many instances when my prayers were answered instantly. Unfortunately, during this period of grief, I felt like God had let me down and I began to have my doubts. Now remember, I told you that even though your mind may have its doubts, which is a completely understandable reaction, your interior theology is what it is. And when you go through doubts, let your doubts come. Don't tell yourself ever that it's terrible to go through a faith crisis or you shouldn't feel despair. You should feel it and give it your best shot. Get up and say, I'm walking straight into despair and I need to experience this. I need to walk in one end and out the other so that it isn't hiding around the corner for me. All right. So your deeper interior theology in your soul is capable, as we'll talk in the 7th chakra, where we'll be shortly, of holding a theology that is stronger than the day-to-day challenges of life. So she says, again, that she was having doubts. And around this time, she said, I heard Father Malachi Martin interviewed on the radio. He was an author. He's passed away since. He's written a number of extraordinary books. He was a Jesuit, and I believe by the time he passed away, he had, in fact, left the Jesuit community, but that's irrelevant. The fact is he wrote very rich and intriguing books. I just want to point out that he was an author with a tremendous background in knowledge of the soul. So she said, I knew instantly he was a man of God. Uncharacteristically, I wrote to him and explained that I had been a professional singer for many years and that I wasn't sure if I was in the right place anymore. I don't really remember much of the letter except to say that I was reaching out for a lifeline of some sort. Father Malachi wrote back and told me he felt certain I was to be his, quote, special bard and to get to it. This was an unexpected response, to say the least, and I remember thinking that I had no idea how to sing for God or even where to begin. You can imagine my surprise when I received a call from a musician friend who asked if I was interested in being the lead singer in a church gig. I should mention that this possibility had never entered my mind. I love it. Anyway, I sang in the church for the next 4.5 years. Oh, and like the rest of the band, I was paid $300 a month. The act of service Father Malachi provided me was that he prayed for me. He never said so, but I knew to the core of my being that he had. Does that get to you? I tell you, her letter to me, her story, captures everything. One of those, who would believe he answered my letter? Do you know how many letters he probably got? And there she was with this passion to sing. She never told anybody about it. So how come that just as she needed this money, this wonderful man answers her letter, that she happened to be listening to the radio to start with, that he tells her to sing as if it's all perfectly timed. Now, this is a sixth chakra quality, and that's the attitude with which you interpret the events that happen to you. And we're going to use that truth to walk across the bridge into the seventh chakra, because it's time to talk about the generosity with which you see God. Seventh chakra, generosity. Here we shift from intuition and the ordinary functional sense to pure guidance, this nature of the seventh chakra. I love the stories that go with the seventh chakra. I love them. I love them. I love them. I love them because they're so absolutely outrageously wonderful. It's bigger than just attitudes. We're now out of attitudes. By the time we get to the seventh chakra, you should already be in the flow of looking at the world. Let's say that you were in a training camp and you went through the first chakra and second, and that you had to pass a few exams, so that by the time you left the chakra, there were certain fundamental truths that simply became functional and functioning in your life. So by the time we get to the seventh, you are absolutely through understanding the power of perception, and that how you see others is itself an act of generosity. Okay? And that in the seventh chakra, it is your receptor for grace. This is where light, grace comes in. And when it penetrates your seventh chakra, it's virgin territory. It's clean. It does not have a direction yet. You can do whatever you want to do, choose to do with that life force. But the first place it goes is into your seventh, and it's just like gorgeous grace. And then, of course, it penetrates into your sixth, where you articulate the grace. You language it. And you language it in attitude, perception, thought, history, rational, with the mind. And then, of course, you have to do something with those perceptions. So you put it into your fifth chakra, where choice is activated, and etc. I don't have to continue to go. I just want to describe to you how it moves through incarnation. But in the seventh, that energy is still absolutely pure fairy dust. Okay? So when it comes in, it's possible for you to choose to elevate your perceptions to where you can see past form and into the energy of another person, where you can see past them, through them, and you can animate the power of a higher truth that is so profound that it's too difficult to live in that truth full time, so you only visit it on occasion. That it's too much to manage. And here's a story that goes with that. We can say in thesis, in theory, that every single person is a beautiful spirit somewhere. In many people, it's obvious. In others, you got to dig. And in some, you'll walk away and say, don't kid yourself. But you can say in theory, on a calm day, on the beach, with loving friends, as the sun goes down, the world's a gorgeous place. And you can, in that moment, absorb the gracious grace in your seventh chakra as you look at the ocean and the setting sun, with the people you love the most, facing a 4-week paid vacation on these wonderful islands with no responsibility, that the world is a seventh chakra haven. You got it. You're up there. And while you're up there, you might even do things like say, you might make these vows to the universe. I'm going to be more positive. I am absolutely going to just do things differently. And even when you start thinking of people that you know you have unfinished business with, for a moment, you actually, for a moment, can experience the benevolence of letting go of them and the grace that comes from feeling the lightness of your seventh chakra that, unlike all the other chakras, has no history. It's your timeless chakra. Energy is pouring in fresh every micro instant. This is where you convert timelessness, grace, into the energy that becomes matter. So seventh chakra has no history. That's why to get into a meditation field of the seventh chakra, where I take you to these wonderful altered states, is so renewing, is such spiritual ecstasy. But to stay up there are certain perceptions that have to become full-time, nonstop, absorbed so naturally into you that you don't have to remind yourself that you're supposed to believe them. Like you have to remind yourself, I should be forgiving. It's kind of like, do you have to remind yourself you should breathe? Do you have to remind yourself that you have to blink your eyes? No, that is so not in your focus. Imagine if these greater truths were so not in your focus that your life became one perceptual experience of seeing grace in motion. Now, this is what I mean by a truth so powerful that you can't live there. You can only visit it. But you know how powerful it is because one visit can last a mighty long time. And it doesn't have to be a long one, but one good visit changes your life forever. That's how potent this is, which is why if you can make contact, that energy comes through you and changes everybody else's life. And that is the grace of channeling. Channeling grace. So I love this story. I love this story. I love this story. Her name is Kathy. And she said, once when I was a security officer at a major hospital, I was walking down a long corridor thinking about what a bad day in Earth School I was having. She said she looked up and noticed that the only person coming toward her was a mental health patient. So she says, I really was feeling down and wanted to keep my eyes to the floor, but I could feel his energy and noticed that he was staring at me. I could feel more energy going through me as we walked closer to each other. I then noticed the incredible smile on his face as he raised his hand in a high-five position. And so, not wanting to appear rude, I too raised my hand to meet his. As we touched and made eye contact, something very profound happened. I experienced so many shifts take place inside of me. I felt joy rush through my body. This man simply reached out with love, something I could not do to him. He taught me that one human being can deeply affect another by the simplest means. He not only changed my day, he changed my life. Here I am, the security officer, and here was this man, the mental health patient, and he touched my heart when no one else could. I am describing a state of consciousness that, tragically, put someone in a mental health place. That man probably saw the world through such grace, maybe too much, that he could not remain grounded. And like I said, there are some perceptions, some truths that are so high, so grace-filled, so pure light. We don't really have much of a vocabulary available to us, that when you're in that perception, you are so profoundly animated that you lose contact, you can lose contact with the grounded side of life. What happens is you cease being burdened or controlled by the security fears that determine most people's choices. Returning now to the first, second, third chakra, fourth, as I bring the whole body politic together. That when a person has those concerns of security first, the ability to let timeless grace call the shots with your perceptions is X'd out because it's just too much. What if you really ordered your life by your fears? Think about it. And you ordered your generosity and the speed of your intuition by your fears, which most people do. As I said, just for an exercise, pay attention to how you regulate your intuition. Pay attention to it. Watch how you interpret the precision of your intuitive hits by the quality with which you are willing to respond. If you really paid attention to yourself, you would catch yourself in that itsy-bitsy, tiny, micro moment, recognizing the depth and fullness of an intuitive perception. And the instant you calibrate how much of it you want to acknowledge. To put it differently, watch it through the chakras. And energy comes in through your seventh chakra. It's pure gold dust. It has not been used. It is timeless. There is no history to it. So as it penetrates, just picture it going in to the top of your head, and now it's behind your forehead. Okay? So behind your forehead, it's yet to pop down to your eyes, where it will engage with well-worn attitudes and assumptions that hold your external world together. So it's still free. It's still clean. Now let's say at that point, because this energy has made contact with you, so it now has your name on it, but not your history. So at this point, while this energy is behind your forehead, it is possible at that frequency to pick up an intuitive hit, to do an intuitive reading, to see someone intuitively, clearly. To, for example, recognize that person is in so much grief, or that person is about to get pregnant, or whatever, or to receive a hit of information, a way to respond to someone with a compassionate heart because you know that's what they need to hear. You get that courage. It comes in then. But now what happens is it starts to lower its frequency. And it starts to come in through your eyes. And now you have to take that wonderful, clear, sparkling, cosmic, beautiful, intuitive energy. And what happens is you have to now weave it through your attitudes, which is the moment, like you've heard in so many of these stories I shared, that your rational mind will meet your intuitive hit. That your rational mind will take the perception that helping others helps you. The truth that to help one person is to help the universe. That there are plenty of fish in the ocean, so to teach a person to fish does not mean you will starve. That these greater truths, that what is one is in the whole, these truths that for 1 minute you actually felt the power of, you will start to dissect at the 6th chakra. Because what will happen, what does happen, and you can feel it as I'm talking to you, is your history comes in and instantly begins to weigh and measure what it is you can afford to perceive that will still hold your world together. And if you suddenly decide, for example, you might at that point tell yourself, like a man did in the story I told you about viewing a homeless man, 2 homeless men, on the way into a restaurant and saying, I don't want to go near them. I don't want to feel their energy. I don't want to feel their vulnerability. Because he admits, if I do, they might contaminate my reality with poverty and pull me in. So in the 6th chakra, that benevolent grace gets breathed in to perceptions that then fall into your 5th chakra and determine how you will see or respond to someone. Now, for a second, you knew all would be well and to help others, that you might even have a contract with somebody. But as it lowers down and then gets to your heart, you will calibrate the speed and the depth to which you will allow yourself to read and experience that other person. You will do that. You absolutely will. And my point in taking you through this journey is to point out, to make you feel, to make you acknowledge how remarkably intuitive you are. That the truth about the human being is that the human being is such an intuitive creature that the choices we make in life are not to develop intuition. What a ridiculous thing. But rather to admit how intuitive we are. That's the real journey. That's why these nonsense things about intuition are so ridiculous to me. This diet and meditate and oming, and that's nonsense. You have to look at why becoming intuitive and sensing the vulnerability of another person scares you. And then you drop it to the 3rd chakra and you realize, do you have enough sense of self to be able to look at someone you don't even like or feel competitive 2nd chakra with, and get an intuitive hit that might help them win the race? What if the God said to you, get out of the race because they need to feel better about themselves than you do right now, and you need to remain humbled? What if the gods gave you that instruction? If I grabbed you right now and ran you right back up to the 7th chakra and really got you rolling in that energy, you'd say, that's fine with me. But I'm going to take you and drop you right through your perceptions. Now you think, but I won't get as much attention and people won't love me. And now I got you in the 3rd chakra and self-esteem, and it's competition, they'll like him better. And it goes down And you think, no way. You can take that intuitive perception and you can just wipe it out, because I'm not interested in that type of intuitive truth. So then when it comes down to the second chakra, it's much easier to give a person a can of food for so many people, because the greater truth that you can truly inspire and receive grace to empower another person's soul is too much for many people to manage. It is too much for most of us to manage. And yet, I have seen and read stories like that precious one of the so-called mental health patient who, for all I know, lives in these perceptions in a world that can't absorb them, and so he's ungrounded. It may well be that a lot of mental hospitals are where mystics without monasteries are collected, and they simply have no other place to go. In the world of voices, they may be angels. But who knows? At any rate, the guidance I leave you with is to tell yourself that you really are exceptionally intuitive. Don't kid yourself. Pay attention to your intuitive hits. They are so clear. They are so clear. If you ask yourself, what am I thinking about something? Or why am I responding this way? From now on, don't say to yourself, I got to figure it out, as if you start looking for answers outside yourself. I got news for you. By the time you are asking for information, energetic, intuitive information about what should I do here, you've already received the intuitive information. What you're now doing is debating with your internal system as to how clearly you want to remember what just came through your intuitive system. You already got the answer. It's whether or not you have the courage to feel, to know, to empower another person. What I learned in these letters is that the nature of most people's regrets is that they recognized after the choices they made that in fact they had received intuitive guidance to act, to say, to do otherwise with someone. But for whatever reasons of fear or insecurity, they chose to not act on the guidance they received. They also acknowledged, by virtue of what they then wrote, because they included the consequence, consequently our introversion ended up doing some kind of penance. Consequently, now I help people who, or whatever, but the guilt just doesn't leave them. It sits on their shoulders like a duck on a June bug. Is it worth being ungenerous in a second? I mean, if the gods are telling you, channel grace to that person. If the heavens are saying, we're using you, then you think about that angst like that model did when she knew for a fact that other model was saying, do I look all right? She knew for a fact this girl was looking for some kind of self-esteem that would get her through the photo shoot. She knew it. And she chose to disempower her. And she knew she was choosing that. I admire her for admitting that, because I think most people know when they are consciously choosing to disempower another human being. I do not really believe that most people can ever use the excuse, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I'm sorry, I didn't know what I was saying. Many cases, of course, that is true. But I think in an equal number of cases, and maybe even a little bit more, 60-40, the person did a reading and knew that the consequences of my empowering you are just simply too much for me to deal with. So when I go into the 7th chakra, I want you to imagine that there is a place in you, a vibration in you, that is so refined that if you were to put the attitude into your 6th chakra, that you could see the world as a place where power has no limit in terms of divinity. That you could choose to see people with generosity even if the package they come in might be 5 sensory, i.e. visually offensive to you or threatening. You could see beyond the body and put into your heart, at the very least, that soul could have been my brother once upon a time. Maybe all I need to do is channel grace to that person by virtue of God bless that person. Maybe that would be enough grace to keep that person from, like that one man said, suicide when he saw a woman smile at him from her car. I really do think it takes a great deal of courage to be a truly generous person. And not just generous, intuitive. I think it takes a great deal to be able to say to heaven, awaken my highest potential, and to realize that's not a job, but a perceptual skill. It's an ability to relate to the world as a divinely energetic domain. It's an ability to say, I can manage those profoundly eternal spiritual truths, and I can manage seeing the world through that. That's your highest potential. Don't ever look for highest potential in the mundane, ridiculous world of occupation. Highest potential is your ability to animate the truths of this universe that you know are eternal, and let the grace from that channel through you and act on that grace. Those are invisible acts of power. And I think that for all the wonderful, wonderful visible acts of power people do for each other, the beds we offer people for the night, or they offer us, the money that you slip into someone's mailbox without your name on it, or the ability to sit at the side of a hospital bed for a friend, with a friend, for hours, for days, sometimes for months. These acts of generosity are equally without measure. But I can't help but think that we somehow have yet to experience the power of a thought. We know the theory of a kind thought. We get to believe kind thoughts matter, but none of us have actually witnessed a thought form spinning from our psyche, entering into the energy field of another person, and blasting it with grace, and then watching the consequence of that grace animate that person's life enough so that they can survive one day and supplement their laws of cause and effect so that their magnetic field can start working again. One positive thought can jumpstart another person's energy field, thus their life. So when I think of invisible acts of power, I think of the power of silent prayer, the power of kindness, and just think, truly, that if you understood how incredibly generous that was, to see people as your equal, to not hold a competitive thought in your mind. It's ridiculous to sort of list ideals and say, now then, let's all live with, but because we can't. We can't all, maybe none of us, I don't think, or let's say most of us, are capable of taking all of these high voltage seventh chakra perceptions and making that a lifetime practice. That's ridiculous. But I do think that somehow we can maintain at least a couple of them as full-time companions. As full-time companions. And so I want to end with a story that was particularly charming to me because, again, of its innocence and maybe because the gentleman's from my hometown. But it's a very short story, but I just loved it. He said that he's not known for acts of kindness. That in fact, he thinks of himself as a very selfish person and it never bothered him. And that he had been out with friends and that he got in his car and he had some food from dinner. You know, another one of those stories of coming home with leftovers, which, like cars breaking down, I'm beginning to think can set you up for a miracle. Do you really want to take leftovers home, or do you think this could be trouble? So anyway, he leaves. He's got the food in the car, and his car breaks down. He's in a bad neighborhood in Chicago. He's nervous. He said it really scared him because he said, I'm a tough guy, but I'm short. And that's not a sort of thing about short people. It was what he said. So a car drives up. 4 guys get out, and they're walking toward his car. He said he was never so frightened in his life, and he really thought his life was over. So he said he just prepared to give him the car, get out, do whatever. And these 4 guys said, come up. And the one says, hey, buddy, can we help you out? He didn't believe them. He thought the whole thing was a setup. So he was afraid to get, so he said, no, you can't help me out. No, that's okay. And they said, well, how are you going to get out of here? He said, your car's not going to fix itself by itself. And he said they had him cornered. So he wanted to tell them that he'd called for help. And then he thought about it. And then he thought, because maybe they'll ask for his phone, because he didn't have a phone. So he said, I called for help. And they started laughing. So finally, this one guy says to him, look, buddy, we really are here to help you. And if we don't, someone else is going to hurt you. And it ain't going to be us. He said, so let's get you out of here. So they opened up the car. They jump-started his car. And he got in and he said, I don't know how to thank you. I just don't know how to thank you. He pulls out his business card. And he's a massage therapist. He's looking at these tattooed characters from this tough part of town. And the one says, oh, yeah, I'll all right, hey, buddies, let's go for a massage. Well, he said they did show up. And they ended up going out to lunch. He said, at the restaurant, I looked across at 4 of the kindest souls I had ever misjudged in my life. I'd like to close with a beautiful prayer that is anonymous, but I think it sort of sums up what I tried to communicate in this series about the presence of miracles, the presence of God, and the presence of angels, actually. May I be open and present to all guidance that directs me to be of spiritual support to others. And when I am in need of support, please direct me to those who you would select on my behalf. I remain forever grateful that you so closely and lovingly keep a mindful eye on all of us who share life on this earth. So often we do not understand why we must endure what is asked of us, and in those times grant me the grace of faith. May I always be guided to live a life of service that benefits humanity and the quality of my own spiritual journey.
This concludes Invisible Acts of Power, Personal Choices That Create Miracles with Carolyn Myss. Music by Stephen McNamara. For more information on workshops and trainings with Carolyn Myss, please visit www.mace.com. For additional copies of this recording, or for a complete catalog of wisdom for the inner life, please visit Sounds True at www.soundstrue.com or call 800-333-9185 or write the Sounds True catalog, P.O. Box 8010, Boulder, Colorado 80306. Thank you for listening.